I became aware of Zach about a dozen years ago when his first book came out, and it was a novel called The Beggar's Shore, sort of a coming-of-age story about a young man who came up in difficult circumstances and trying to find a path. Zach and I sort of became email buddies a few years ago, just talking about issues like this. Zach just put out a new book. Well, let me get this straight. So you have a book coming out this year that is nonfiction, right?
I gotta finish that one still. It's a little bit off.
Okay, but anyway, so Zach just put out his second novel, and it's a book about based on his own experiences coming up in Chicago, and it's focused on a group of sort of directionless, alcoholically hazed furniture movers that are kind of going nowhere in life and looking for a path. So I just finished reading that over the weekend. It's an interesting book, but what's really interesting about it is the subtext is how does mental health create crime? What's the link between the way people look at themselves and the experiences they have and then their conduct in the world? So Zach was a furniture mover for 5 years. He's got the bad back to prove it. And just as a way of introducing Zach and explaining, showing you a little bit better how this all ties into what we're talking about today, I just want to read this introduction from the book, which is called Heavyweight Champion of Nothing. The motivation for most criminal acts can be deconstructed to this basic summary. I saw something I wanted, so I took it. Some people steal to eat. Some steal to repair their injured self-images. For fun or survival, a degree of perceived personal gain is always present. In the most extreme examples, reality is not a factor. I once interviewed a man who believed his mother had been replaced by a CIA-designed android. If he killed the fake mom, he believed, the real one would return. Crime only has to make sense to the person committing the act. Excluding the paranoid delusions and forensic profiler TV shows, most crimes are mundane and not very intelligent. Born from our dissatisfaction with our lives, we commit self-defeating minor protests, taking merchandise home from the freezer, fudging mileage reimbursements, and falsifying time cards to passively voice our resentment. When we see others who have to do much less to earn more, we displace the anger to protect our egos. Displacing that anger can create a self-imposed martyrdom. I suffer, and for that I'm a good person. The world owes me. When that narcissistic specialness is not recognized, the martyred person begins to take from others properties, liberties, and time. He goes on to say, now I'm a social worker running a therapeutic program for people suffering from severe psychotic and substance abuse disorders. Often, I meet our clients only after they've cycled through hospitalizations, homelessness, and incarcerations. A majority of our clients have seen the inside of a jail, some for arson, some for murder, but almost all were severely disorganized criminal acts, and rarely were any financial plots more complicated than a purse snatching. While there is a degree of personal culpability with drug use, schizophrenia is not a lifestyle choice. I want to skip a little more. We all try to protect ourselves from that fear of annihilation, of being entirely wiped away by the world. That drive might also push a person to write a book about working-class, small-time criminals trying to maintain their self-respect. This book is about people who know they won't leave a mark in the world and can feel their little bit of comfort and protection being threatened. Sometimes a person feels the only way he can leave a mark is by destroying things. To protect our own self-definitions, we are sometimes willing to salt the earth we stand on. Rich revolutionaries try to blow up the government. Poor ones set fire to the only corner store in the neighborhood. But both would rather fight and lose than not fight at all. So Zach works doing street-level mental health with what a lot of people would consider bottom-of-the-barrel clients, where a good day for some of these guys is not smoking crack for 12 hours. That's a good day.
Actually, it's a bad day for a lot of people. I couldn't get it.
So today we're going to be talking about where we get these dysfunctional people, and in fact defective human beings, I think is probably the way to describe a lot of them. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how the word gets out about this and how the media covers these issues. So, Zach Mucha.
Hi, everybody. I'm Zach. Can you hear in the back? It's okay. All right, and when I do this, I'd rather it's a conversation between all of us. So yell out. Don't even worry about raising your hand. Most of the conversations I have are really nowhere near in such a nice room. They're usually in like a 9x12 flophouse room, and I'm convincing someone why they have to take their meds or why they have to go in their car with me. Let's go to the hospital. I'm a social worker. I run a team of 12 clinicians. We have our own psychiatrist, our own nurse, our own therapists, our own case managers. We work with about 70 clients who are an ACT program, assertive community treatment. And all that really means is our clients do not want mental health services. They don't feel they have any mental health issues. They don't feel they have any drug issues. They may agree they have financial issues and housing issues, and that's usually how I convince people to work with us. I go to a hospital, do an intake, and I'm not crazy. I don't need your help. Do you have a place to live after this? No. Well, I can help you with that. And it usually takes several months to pull someone to work with us. And we're on call 24/7. We hospitalize people ourselves when we have to. When we can't, we have the police assist us. Actually, I was telling Trey I got tasered in January. A client of ours was doing I had to call the police to help hospitalize a client. And the young man has a very severe trauma history. He's tiny. He's maybe 110 pounds. He was like iron, and he was shoving 3 Chicago cops around, which is really hard to do. And they tried to taser him, it didn't work, and he was shoving them all toward an open window. And do you know how a taser gun works? Pull the trigger, the needles shoot out, but you're done. After that, you pull that off, and all you have is a stun gun. So in the middle of this, I grabbed my client, pulled him down over his back, because we're all in a flophouse room, and I'm holding him. And as I'm holding him, the officer decided that would be the best time to taser the client. So I got the jolt too, and I said some injudicious things about the officer's relationship to his mother. But the police even knew they screwed up, because they actually asked me how I was doing. Usually they just yell at me when I get involved. But this is what our team does. That's a real extreme example, but we're really the only material between our clients and the rest of the world. By the time they get to us, they've gone through every other program. Every other program has failed them. We're sort of the last stop before a nursing home or a long-time institutionalization. They have no families that want to deal with them, and we have to find them housing. We see our folks every day. And it usually takes several months before a client really starts trusting us, which is, that's the last choice any human gets to make. Who am I going to trust? We have people for years who don't trust us, won't trust us. Okay, we'll still make sure you stay housed, and we'll keep you going. But that's the one goal for our team is, this is for the social workers, to build a relationship with this person who has no one on the planet. They have to know that they can come to our office or they can call us and they're going to be safe. If we could do that, we did our job. Part of that is also telling our clients, you come to our office, it's a safe place for you. It is not a safe place for you to beat on anyone else. And we were talking about, I have a good knife collection in my desk. And it's just a rule, if you bring your weapon in, Zach keeps it. But no one's put up a fight. We've been able to talk people out of having weapons. So people want, that's one of the main things people want. No matter what field you're going to be in social work, they want to feel respected and they want to feel safe. And they want to be heard. If you could provide that to whether you're working with kids or the elderly, anyone, those are the 3 things any human is going to want. All right.
Real quick, the first day that I came into this class, I remember we had social work students, public policy students, journalism students, just like that. Is it still that way? Is everybody mixed up now?
Yeah.
Everybody's mixed up? Which means everybody's talking to each other? Well, that's a great thing, and I think that's one of the things we talked about the first day was that, once you get into working for public agencies or newspapers, none of you, unless you try really, really hard, will ever speak to each other again. And that's a problem. There's a breakdown when we're trying to figure out, we try to figure out why things fall apart, why changes in the system don't occur to the satisfaction of the citizenry. It has something to do with the fact that nobody's talking to each other. Social workers aren't allowed to talk about the cases that they're working. Reporters can't get access to the stories that they need. Policy people are taking their recommendations from administrators of agencies rather than people that do the frontline work. That's a big issue. So I'm glad that everybody's getting mixed up, but Zach and I were talking about this today. I guess, you were just telling this, this story about getting tased, and this client who, by most accounts, people just say he's insane, right? I mean, that's a hell of a day at work. And I think we also talked about early on with the social workers, about social workers always have the best stories when they get off of work. When everybody's sitting around having a drink, who had the craziest day? It was the social workers, they always do. When was the last time a reporter tapped you on the shoulder or was able to infiltrate the world that you work in and get a story like this?
Oh, never. I'm under strict rules that I cannot talk to any journalist, reporter, any media without written permission of my employers. Which, okay, that makes sense. And I've called reporter friends of mine and saying, I have a story for you. And it would be a good story, but she would tell me, boy, I can't do that because I have to keep a decent relationship with the Chicago police. So there's all these natural barriers, and they're natural because we're trying to protect ourselves. And it's really not protecting ourselves, we're protecting the people who make more money than we do.
Well, I think there's a sense in this room, and I was just talking about it, that as a reporter, you can't get access to
which is
what's happening under the radar.
Which is correct. I mean, just HIPAA laws. I mean, we can't disclose the identity of anyone we're working with.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of reasons for confidentiality.
So how would somebody go about it? How would they get in?
How would a reporter get into
your world?
I've offered it, and there would be a bunch of waivers someone would have to sign, and I would also, really that. But I'd need the agency to back it up, telling the reporter that if you use any identifying information for any client, we will sue you. But I've also talked to reporters who've told me that their editors have said, get the story in, we'll worry about getting sued later. Which, all right, that scares me too. So I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out because I've had reporters ask, can I ride along with your team? Which it would be a pretty cool story for a reporter, and I haven't been able to say yes yet.
Because your bosses wouldn't allow it?
Yeah. I mean, I would lose my job.
Right. Is there any way you would do it on the slide?
Then I'd really be putting myself at risk. I haven't thought about it, but I'm also putting a client's identity, a client's personal information at risk, and I can't do it. If it were just me, maybe I'd take the risk, but if I'm risking someone else's private life, I have no right to do that. That would be a problem. Yeah.
Just as a storyteller yourself, I mean, to what degree, and Trey, you can answer this too, to what degree is it because there is this big journalistic preference for full name and all that kind of stuff, and to what degree is it really that important?
I don't think it would be important. And I mean, I think it'd be a real tragedy to disclose a client's name, address, their situation, then find out, someone, family or something awful happened. I don't think it's important at all because it's the narrative rather than, they're not celebrities. Who cares? And it's the narrative that is what engages people. So I don't think the name would be important at all.
It's an issue. I'm working on a story right now about schools in Oakland. I went and interviewed some kids and some high school kids. And I told the editors that were working on the story, there's a likelihood that these kids were going to say things that weren't going to be flattering to them if anyone ever tried to Google them down the line, and we might have to go with just first names. So I brought that back to the editors, and the question was, well, why are there no last names in this story? Essentially, one kid is talking about how at her school, when somebody gets bullied, what they need to do is bitch slap the bully. Another kid's talking about being a chronic truant. So the editors looked and they said, well, that's not too sensitive. That's not, and that's fine. I mean, I think that's the thinking, and they're shooting for journalistic integrity. I don't exactly see it that way. I look at this as a young person who, no matter what I tell them or how together they are, they're not really going to understand the full impact of talking to a journalist. And that they're going to be applying to colleges soon or applying for jobs soon. And either of those things, I think, could be damaging to what they're trying to do. So from my point of view, it's not important, but I think the prevailing attitude in journalism is that you get the last name. In fact, there was a Pulitzer story video piece that came out last year. Might have come out of Pittsburgh, where they had videoed these kids. They had first and last names on all of them, and all types, all kinds of criminal behavior they engaged in and problems they were having. I took issue with that.
Think about it. I'd be horrified if whatever I said at the age of 16 had been recorded forever. I want to kill myself.
Or 21.
Or yeah, we can go past 21. So in that way, I think we do have to protect. We have to protect people's personal information.
To what degree in this class and for and in this class and the future classes going forward, and as practitioners of a new journalism, in a way, to what degree do we have? I mean, what's the policy going forward?
For whose policy?
Our policy.
Oh, this class's policy?
This class's policy. I mean, I would say my policy is I would allow it, but do you think that the fear of somebody giving false information, is so high that I should be afraid of that? I mean, what I'm saying is that you jump in, Eliza.
That just reminded me of kind of what happened earlier when someone was phrasing something a certain way, and this had to deal with abuse and neglect, and it was a very interesting learning experience to see how much we know, but then how much someone else can phrase that differently. And I think with mental health, it's such a touchy subject in terms of how you phrase it, that I wonder how much that has to do with this conversation, is the fear of not only the privacy of the clients, but also the perception of their mental health in media. I wonder if that has anything to do with what you were just kind of proposing in terms of policy for this class.
Well, he said ethics, and so the ethic, or ethically driven journalism is one that would have the last names because you are fighting the potential ethical misconduct of a journalist who would use that leeway to then tell stories that are false, which has happened on numerous occasions, right? I mean, it's not like it hasn't happened before. But I think that the ethical coverage is the coverage that would consider the fact that it's what you say at 16, or the description of my many mental health problems now or later would then hurt my future prospects of getting jobs or whatever else. So, the ethical thing to do would be to respect that and not use the name, which I've used names many times. And so this is something I'm always back and forth. So as thinking about moving forward and your next assignments, I'm just thinking, you guys you don't need to give the last name if you don't.
And for social work folks, I think you'd have to prioritize your license.
Yeah.
Anything that's going to risk you your license, you can't do. You just can't.
That just brings me back to a question I was going to ask a minute ago, which is I'm dealing with this issue of wanting to report about sexually exploited youth and trying to go through the channels that I have as a social worker to get access as a journalist. And one of the things I've tentatively proposed, but I think is worth having a conversation here about is what if with this agency that knows my character, that knows my adherence to confidentiality, would you give me access in some way if I could offer you a read-through of it to ensure that I have protected confidentiality? And I know that that's a very touchy journalism issue. At least I think it might be. But I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
How would I guarantee, even after I read through what you hand me as the final copy, how do you guarantee that that doesn't get changed after it leaves my hand?
Well, if I were to sign, like you said, your agency has forms. If I were to sign those forms and agree to let you read my story, I mean, I would be legally bound and I would be under my social work license.
I think his point is that, you know, how can you be sure?
I can trust you totally.
What about your
I'll
editor?
know your editor.
Gotcha.
And I did some journalism too. I know they sneak things in there.
Okay, all right. So no, that's not a viable.
No, I don't think it's not a closed discussion at all.
No, I'm just giving my personal opinion. I think.
Well, and for the sake of this class, which is different than the real world, I mean, we actually know Orville and Daniel and can say, hey, this is the agreement. What I submit needs to be what I submit. And if you need to make changes in order to publish it, we've got to go back to my agency.
I'll tell you why why all journalists hate that. Is because, you know, you send something to somebody and they start nitpicking right away. And they say, well, that's not exactly the right characterization. Actually, my quote should be different.
Mm-hmm.
And so then in the end, they end up writing the whole story,
Right.
so you don't have anything. So
Right.
that's why it's such a problematic practice. Then again, I mean, just reasoning out loud, you know, I often read back quotes to my sources because I don't want them to be like shocked that I'm repeating what they said, and I want them to have a chance to have, you know, correct me if there's any substantive errors. That being said, I don't know what the policy should be in terms of having, in very limited cases, having sources review, if not the whole, probably not the whole thing, but portions that could be controversial or whatever that they need to review. I think that would be permissible, but the whole thing, you just run afoul. I mean, you run into danger, I think.
Can I say something about that? I think you know, we should be looking at this if we're looking at this from a journalistic standpoint, we should look at it the same way that we would look at it from a social work standpoint. I mean, a social worker who's doing their job is looking at every single case individually, as though, you know, they're all totally individual. You're not going to do the same interventions aren't going to work with every client. It's the same thing here. You know, when we're talking about protecting the client, or excuse me, the source, whether it's their identity or their livelihood, you know, that needs to be figured out on a case-by-case basis. You know, there are differences between everybody that you talk to, what they understand, what they have on the line, all that stuff. You know, that said, you know, if you're talking, the idea of showing something to somebody, you know, I never show a whole draft really to anybody. I've done it once or twice when I was really just writing about one person's life. And regardless, I never offer anybody approval over anything. And I'm really clear about that. And I don't send it to them. You know, I'll read it to them over the phone. You know, or I'll meet them and hand them a hard copy and let them look over something. Typically what I'll do is, you know, I'll take a paragraph and a quote and I'll read it to somebody over the phone. And I'll let them know, like, look, if this is inaccurate, you know, or if you have an argument that this is completely out of context and we're shading everything wrong and totally loading the story in the wrong direction, then we'll have that conversation. But yeah, I don't think that, you know, it's all about being right. You know, it's all about being right. It really has nothing to do with protecting the source. I just want to say one other thing, you know, about you were talking about doing a story about sexually exploited youth, you know, and you want to protect them, you know, from, you know, you don't want, you know, protect their identity, protect their livelihood, and that's great. But one way to be thinking about this is there another way of the story? You know, and we talked a little bit about this before class, but why do you want to talk to a sexually exploited young person? You know, is there data that can tell you what's wrong with the system as well as that young person? Or if you're going to talk to that young person, what can they tell you about the system? Not what is, you know, what is this poor person's horrible life been like, but you know, what can we figure out about where the holes are in the system? And if that person has a source, can can give you that because they're an expert source on the system because they've lived in it, then maybe there's a reason to talk to them. But otherwise, I really have to guard against, against talking to young people who are in crisis, and trying to, I tell sources sometimes break down and start telling me their life, and I tell them I'm not a therapist. I don't know how to put this back in a box for you. I can tell you to maybe seek professional help, but I'm not the person to talk to about that.
Happens to me all the time. I am a therapist.
All right. One thing that we were talking about also earlier today was, how policy, and this class is informed by policy, it's informed by practices as they exist. But what they're actually, it's meant to do is understand why the public doesn't demand that the system changes, or where the lines get crossed between ground zero and the policy level. So, I wanted to ask Zach, when it comes to interventions, prevention, when we talk about crime prevention, people who are mentally ill, people who come up through the system and are having problems, what types of laws or policies or sort of institutional roadblocks have you come across trying to provide services? Because I think that's a big starting point for people who are looking for stories.
Okay. And the roadblocks are usually financial. And where does the funding stop? I have a lot of clients who have pretty extensive criminal records, and I also know Cook County Jail, which is like one of the biggest county jails in the country, does not refer anyone to my program. Funding is cut for, and this is changing, at least for the juveniles in Cook County, which is great. But the funding has been cut for quite a while for that linkage from county jail to mental health services. And so where do these guys go when they're coming out of county jail? One of the stories is they're going to psychiatric nursing homes. The psychiatric nursing homes would take a silverback gorilla as long as the gorilla had Medicaid, and they do not care. So the stories are going to be where things drop off, and where do we lose people who need help. It's going to be where there's no funding. And the only way to find that is, all right, where are there a plethora of services? There's a ton of services for women and children, a ton of services for adults, but there's always this gap. At least I'm not sure how it is in California, in Illinois, or Chicago. I'm not concerned with the rest of Illinois. There's this huge drop off between 18 and 21. That's when people drift out of DCFS, and usually we don't know where they go until the state finds them again in some other place. What we really need is a program like an ACT program specifically for adolescents, juveniles. And people working with kids now, you're doing the actual really preventive work. What I'm doing with my day job is really minimizing damage for the community, for the individual. And I'm too late. And we see the same things. And we've been with a lot of clients over a long enough period of time that we could see the severe psychosis, and we're able to piece together the narratives. And we're seeing childhood trauma. And it doesn't have to be physical abuse, doesn't have to be sexual abuse. It could be emotional abuse, which is just as bad. And we're able to put this together. I don't know how much of this stuff you've gone over, probably not a lot. The short version of what psychosis is, it's the inability to differentiate between myself and the rest of the world. I don't know what's me, I don't know what's everything else. If you look at it developmentally, that's very early. And that's one of the first things we learn. Something interrupted that learning. I mean, there's a genetic component too, but this is And all psychosis, all mental health issues is the brain trying to protect itself. It's trying to make sense of the world. The person who thinks the CIA is after them, okay, there's no paranoia without grandiosity. The CIA doesn't, change clothes. The guy who's hearing voices, and all right, it must be God talking to me. Well, all right, this is the brain trying to find some sort of rationale for what I'm hearing. Because if I have a choice between deciding my brain is messed up or it's God talking to me, I'm going to pick God talking to me. And that's how I want to see myself. And it's very much about self-perception. How do we fit ourselves into the world? I have one client we've been working with for years. I did his initial intake in a hospital. He gave me no information at all. Absolutely nothing. He was homeless, but he's just bellowing, barking, assigning himself all these hyper-masculine identities. I'm Steven Scott, you're Bruce Willis. Remember when they kidnapped your daughter and I kicked you the gun? And he was just that pressure bellowing in my face for an hour. But he would stop and look at me to see how I was reacting. So, okay, I mean, he clearly was not healthy, but he was also trying to see how I was handling it. Ended up working with him. I had to argue with the hotel to get him in a hotel. And he called me Bruce Willis. From day one, he was calling me Bruce Willis. So I have to argue, with these people running a flop house hotel. This mother and daughter couple. And I got my guy down the hall, and these two women are like, is he crazy? I said, that's really not an appropriate term. I'm a social worker. I just try to help people find housing. And he's down the hall, you gotta scare him, Zach. You gotta scare him. It was better before Eve. I'm like, shut up. This is going really well. And I explained we're on call 24/7. If there's any problems, call me. But there's not gonna be. He'll be fine. 3 hours later, I got a phone call. Oh my God, someone beat up your friend really bad. And someone did, because I could see he could not differentiate between himself and other people, and as the rest of the world crowded him, he decided I have to back them up. And he would try to back people up by screaming in their face. And it doesn't work all the time. And someone did a good number on his face. So I found him in a hospital, and due to, like we were describing HIPAA laws, we can't tell you who's on the unit or not. I know he's there. And this is like one of the few hospitals I haven't worked with on the north side. For days, they're not letting me up there. This is a new client. I'm not going to lose the guy. I just found him housing. I don't want him to lose the housing. I don't want him to go back to the street. So I sneak up to the psychiatric unit. I'm at the Sally Port door, ring the bell, and someone comes out and she's like, can I help you? I say, yeah, I'm Bruce Willis. He looks at me and goes, oh, thank God, this guy's been saying his case manager, Bruce Willis, is going to come get him. That was the only way I could prove that I knew who he was and he knew who I was. But all right, there are ways around HIPAA. So, social workers and journalists are not mortal enemies. But this guy is so terrified because he can't tell what his relationship is to anything. And that's psychosis. And that's, where am I? It's got to be a horrifying feeling. And how did we get on this? What was the question I was supposed to answer?
I forgot that one. I know how to do it. How much information, it's obviously different all the time. How much information are you sometimes able to get on these people? I mean, I hear about a guy like this, and I want to know where he came from.
Yeah.
You and I talked, today about the bad seed myth when you got a sociopath. The idea that people are born sociopaths, and that's why they're serial killers, and kind of thinking differently about that. That no, in fact, we make these kind of people. When we're talking about psychosis, when we're talking about paranoid schizophrenia and those types of disorders, are people born with these, or are most of your clients abuse victims or victims of neglect?
There's a genetic component to psychosis, other mental health issues, but what they're finally starting to acknowledge is that there are social, environmental issues that trigger this. That trauma is enough. There's not a barrier, or not a barrier, but a level that will trigger trauma. It is different for everyone. If your genetic component is very high. If there's a long history of schizophrenia in the family, it may not take much trauma to set that off. If there's not much of a genetic component, the trauma has to be enough that it threatens the person's sense of self, which we're talking about emotional abuse. That's why emotional abuse is so horrifically damaging and no one much addresses it. It's, a pattern of behavior that threatens a person's sense of self to the point where they start to believe that they're not worthy of love, caring, respect. And that self-diminishment, if it happens early enough, okay, it goes back to that point where, how do I separate myself from the world? One of the scariest training videos I ever saw, and I wish I knew who did this, I wasn't paying enough attention, but it was an infant, pre-verbal, on a table in the bassinet, and the mother was standing over the child, and they're having a great time. Mom is cooing and giggling, waving her fingers, and the baby's cooing and giggling back, and you could almost count the syllables. Baby says 5 syllables, mom says 6, baby says 7, and you can see the real affect going back and forth, this real reciprocity. They're both contributing to this communication. All right, next clip. Same baby, same mother. The baby coos and giggles. The mom, no expression on her face, keeps her arms down, just staring at the baby. Has anyone seen this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dude, I'm going to ask you where it's from.
Oh my god, I have YouTube, I have no idea.
Okay, all right, fine, there.
Yeah, I don't like that.
But it's horrifying because the baby is trying to communicate with mom. This is, the caretaker. This is the source of everything in the world. And she's not responding. You can see the baby break eye contact and almost takes a breath and tries again. Waves his hand, coos and giggles, and mom does not respond. And each time the baby tries this, at the end, he's regressing. He's actually drooling. And he's feeling his own hands. Like, am I really here? It was
really sad.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
It gives me goosebumps.
There might be, hopefully not, but multiple of these experiments, but the one I saw, the baby just kind of gave up.
Yeah.
After, it was he tried, and mom didn't respond to him. And then he's just kind of confused and then distressed, and then just kind of learned helplessness.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's either learned helplessness, which is what the child's decision is, I have to change myself to do whatever I have to maintain this relationship with the source of all life. I have to do that. Whatever it takes, I will change myself. And no matter how many times I have to do it throughout my life. That's what most people do. And that's, okay, the fault must be mine that this relationship is broken. The small minority, and this is how empathy is built. That reciprocity, that's empathy. That feeling going back and forth, that's how we learn to actually care for other people. The people who don't make that decision, which isn't, it's a decision to save your life. I will do whatever I have to for that emotional feeling, for food, shelter, clothing. But some people, children, adults, decide, all right, this is how the world is. I could try my damnedest, and I'm not going to get any emotional response from this person because, okay, their feelings can't be real. It's a joke. She was playing. Because sometimes she feels like that, sometimes she doesn't. So the person decides the only feelings in the world that count are mine. We used this in a previous book, talking about Carl Pain's-Ring. If anyone knows who he was, before serial killers became like celebrities, in the 20s, he actually told the truth. And he wrote his own autobiography from death row. And he said, you all made me. You tortured me in your schools. You tortured me in your, juvie joints. You tortured me in your prisons. If I could kill all of you, I would. And he was really a bad guy. But he didn't try to play anyone. He said, I don't care. I feel nothing for you people. This is all a joke. None of you people, you're all hypocrites. Which, to a sociopath, the world would look hypocritical. everyone's acting like they care about each other, that can't be right. So,
if you read a newspaper story about this guy, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, what's the takeaway? Wow, this guy is really bad news. It's a good thing we're going to put him to death, right? If the idea is to find the sweet spot that lets you tell the story of how the baby in the bassinet is not getting any attention becomes, say, one of your clients, right?
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we? When I read the book, my thinking was I would call this an investigative novel.
Okay.
Okay, it looks at to an extent to the origins of crime and how the mind functions in terms of how can I fulfill my needs, how can I deal with the abyss, which is what I see in front of me, right? And how can I find comfort, right, shelter in this storm?
Yeah.
And the result is crime. But this is a novel.
Yeah.
Right. And it's 200 and something pages long. Why don't we see journalism that looks like that? Or do you see journalism? Do you see news? Well, the things that we're describing right now, that you're describing, the nuance. How do we connect the dots between a lot of you were talking about pack journalism in your blurb. A lot of journalism around people with mental health issues or traumatic childhoods has to do with a teacher gets busted for molesting a student, and everybody runs over and gets a mug shot at the guy and then prints that. That's the story of that.
Okay.
Are you seeing the media do any better than that when it comes to these issues?
It's hard because the media is so pressured to come up with a story. And mental health stories, you're in a rare position where you could actually talk about policy, about programs growing, about the impact, when a lot of places will wait until there's a mass shooting and say it's a mental health issue, which it is. I agree. There's a salacious aspect that we're not going to be able to get rid of with journalism. I think, I don't know, I can't direct journalism, but to talk about the idea, all right, how do we intervene early enough to keep someone from not building any empathy? It literally it doesn't have to be the parent. There has to be some person who teaches the child that, your empathy will be paid back. What hurts you hurts me too. When the child learns that might be all we need to turn someone around. At my level, it's very hard. When we get clients at my day job, we found out, we're very good at convincing people to take their medications. We're good at that. We've actually had some people who are floridly psychotic, on Mars psychotic. We got him taking his meds, and after a few months, personality came out. He was a really bad guy. We were safer having him off his meds. It turned into, a bit of an ugliness. So, the work has to be done with kids, with people much younger, before, the character is calcified. We were talking about this earlier, I could think of the adults who really turned my life around when I was young enough. And they kept me off the track. I'm not like I was going to go to prison. But, they really put me in a position where I could actually do more. And to this day, I really feel wonderful about this. It was a teacher, who convinced me to like read. He knew I was such a jerky kid. He couldn't give me a book directly. He would just sort of throw it and say, you might want to look at that. But it was someone who, really, there was a bond. And someone who will create the bond with the kid, that might be all we need to keep the Carl Panzerings from overtaking us.
Or the guy in Aurora, Colorado, right? And we were talking about that.
Yeah.
You wrote an essay about the Colorado Batman shooting.
Yeah.
Shortly after it came out. we're talking about the, people who are calcified and not intervening early enough. What did the media miss? I mean, the media was all over that story. It was a national story. What did the media miss in that story that people should have been focusing on? It wasn't lost opportunity.
The real lost opportunity, I mean, you all know the Aurora, Colorado shooting. The young man, I mean, if you really look at, and there's symptoms really are metaphorical. It's sort of interesting when you get a chance to get enough information. And we have nowhere near enough. I'm sorry? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought we have nowhere near enough information yet, but just that he was the Joker. That he dressed up as the Joker. And the joke, and he had no real exit plan. He had like a big Hollywood ending that was going to happen in his apartment, but he wasn't going to be there. He really had that we know of, no real exit plan for himself. He could have committed suicide. He could have fought it out with the police. Just sort of tape ended and he was out in the parking lot, which is sort of what happens to the Joker. He does in Batman comics, cartoons, movies. He does his bad deeds, wrecks the town. Batman catches him, throws him in jail, and we wait for the next episode, comic book, movie. But the Joker, the whole idea of the Joker is that he's like the id of society, and he shows us the hypocrisy. He's the sociopath who says, it's all a joke. All you people acting like nice to each other and civil, it's just a lie. You're all just, puppets. I'm the only one who knows the truth. You'll hear that over and over again when you get a real hardcore sociopath who isn't playing anymore. But that's what the Joker stood for. And I don't know if the media missed it because it's just not information, but the school, there's no way no one in that school didn't hear that kid's internal monologue.
Are you talking about Connecticut?
No, the Colorado stuff.
Oh, okay.
Because it came out later that, co-students heard him saying bizarre things. The psychiatrist heard a lot. And the psychiatrist did the right thing, and she gave the information to the school's outreach team. But from what it sounds like, is the school outreach team was ready to go meet with him, but as soon as he handed in his dropout papers, the outreach team backed off. So he's not a student anymore. And that was literally the 30 days before he went to the theater. And one of the things I was proposing was schools, universities have to partner with the state, the county, to have an outreach team that encompasses any school. Just looking at the population. This is 17 to 25 is when people have their first psychotic breaks. It's when people are in major transitions in their life. It's when they're under a ton of pressure from every point. It's either a wonderful time or a lousy time in your life, or it's both in the same day. But it's a lot to carry. And with the young man from Colorado, even if you look at what he was studying and what he was trying to major in, he knew something was wrong and he was trying to figure it out. He was studying alternate realities. He was studying neurology. I don't think that's a coincidence. The movie The Matrix, y'all might be too young to remember that. All right. That is like the psychotic Catcher in the Rye. Like what Catcher in the Rye is to celebrity shooters, The Matrix is to psychotic people. Because it's a wonderful premise. This is not the real world. And the real world is actually in my head, where I'm a superhero and I have a girlfriend who wears leather. And I'm not living in this flophouse hotel room, living off $700 a month. In the real world, in my head, I have special powers that no one understands. And I really hate The Matrix, because I have to have this argument quite a bit.
Why do you hate it?
I don't hate it. I mean, it's like
Because it glamorizes that?
no, it doesn't. I mean, I don't hate it. It's just I've heard it multiple times. It actually taught me something. It's all right. I don't hate it. Sometimes I just like to complain.
So, when we're talking about the Aurora shooting, though, I mean, you just brought up the point that there is this gap in service. Right.
Yeah.
And did anybody talk about that with it?
I have not heard anything about that.
Right.
Right now, everyone's at, liability and trying to make sure no one's going to get sued.
And that's something that can be done, I think, in terms of, when you're looking for stories. Pack journalism has all kinds of problems, but one thing that you can always do is you can actually follow the pack and see where they don't go.
Yeah. That one university with a halfway decent, lousy football team would be able to fund a team like mine. Just the revenue a football team would bring to the university, that would take care of a crew of social workers to do outreach on campus. Even a team without the steroids, they should still get enough tickets.
What is the outreach like here? Does anybody know?
I mean, I think Larkin Street really fills the gap in terms of accessing people for big 14 to 24. So they look at that gap and they have actually kind of redefined the adult, at least in San Francisco. So you can come to them and you can display all these things. And if you have really psychotic symptoms, I think currently they still don't have the actual staff really take care of it, but they'll refer you out. And then you have Trey, which is transition youth, which is county, and that's mental health services. And then it'll be bridged into adult mental health services, which can still access you at 18. But I think Larkin Street is kind of an anomaly actually in terms of nationwide. You have projects in New York and you go with Larkin Street. That's about it.
We have a funding stream in California for transitional age youth. That's why Larkin Street gets funded. There is a stream. So we need transitional TA-wide funding.
Okay.
And it addresses 17 to 24. Kids coming out of foster care, the kids who typically are going to get, lost. So it's wonderful.
Is that only in San Francisco or is that outside?
No, this is in California. So
You're talking about maybe 12.
transitional age youth funding, there's a funding stream that we can access as clinicians, so there's dollars.
Sure, but Larkin Street was being used as an example of that outside of San Francisco.
Tay is statewide and by
Tay's
county,
statewide.
and then Larkin Street is basically, it's a nonprofit, but it's contracted also with the county. But it's a nonprofit.
So do the teams do outreach?
Yeah.
Or like bang on the door?
In the outreach that I've seen and been a part of is basically in the 10, well, it's actually all neighborhoods, and it's mostly accessing homeless youth and then a lot of homeless youth who are currently using, and then with them, of course, you're going to find a lot of mental health disorders. And that's usually where you start. And so the outreach is usually the entry point, and then you build a relationship and hope that they come in.
Yeah.
And then as they access more staff and more supports and more programs, then you keep bridging them. So that's usually what happens in the city.
Did you?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, coming from as an undergraduate student in terms of what resources are available for students, in institutions like colleges for mental health services, there's not a lot.
Yeah.
And especially, when you look at university campuses where a lot of students are under pressure to kind of succeed, especially in a place like this, I think it's something the university is definitely taking note of, but when suicides happen and everyone's like, what are we doing mental health, what services are we providing to students? And we quickly realized that a lot of the people that are interacting with students on a day-to-day basis are just either not trained fully in terms of like residence hall staffs kind of know what to look for.
Sure.
When students, there's a committee called the Students for Concern, or Students of Concern, that kind of look at students that they feel might be at risk, but oftentimes, that only comes to them if they've been accused of violating the code of conduct, they do something wrong on the university campus.
Yeah.
So you're coming at them when you're at the same time accusing them of violating campus policies, right? You're trying to help them while also putting them through a judicial process in the university. It's counteractive.
It's not the best way to start there.
Exactly. Exactly. So charging them and trying to help them at the same time rather than coming in another point.
Yeah, I was going to add to the students of concern. I only know from the graduate student instructor here, like if you help to teach a class with a professor, you're like the help essentially that runs sections. If you have a student that like stops showing up to section or is getting a failing grade, you're supposed to email them with a list of resources. At least this is what I was told. A list of resources, and then you're supposed to put their name on a list from the department. Had a running list of like students that had either, had fallen off of the radar or the map somehow. And I don't know where that list went, but it was called the Students of Concern list. So I don't know I'm guessing nothing happened, but it was a little bit bizarre.
So I'm sorry, you could anonymously put a student on this list? Or
Yeah,
Susan
I mean,
put herself on this list?
they knew it was from me, but I don't think it mattered that it was from me. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, this is the class that he's in. And he's, not shown up to section for this many weeks, but he's still in the class and he's failing, so we should be concerned about him.
And I'll tell you, I've seen numerous departments with these lists sitting on a desk and have not gone anywhere, right?
Yeah,
So these lists are collected sometimes, but getting from them to the actual administrative body that runs the committee sometimes doesn't happen. Sometimes that list will get there and that student will drop out of the university and then it's like, oh, no longer a student.
Yeah.
So there are tons of issues, and going back to what you said, when students leave, then that gap is massive. It's when a student drops out and they take a break, when they take a semester off, there's no connection.
That's a big point of concern.
Well, I mean, it's like, when somebody on the sex offender registry moves and doesn't bother to tell anybody, right? I mean, who's looking for them? They're off the grid now.
Yeah.
That person out there. It's interesting. So, what's this called? The policy of being able to, student of concern?
Yeah, that was the term that I was given, the same one that you used.
Because there's a committee that the administration runs, different stakeholders are part of that committee that then attempts to keep track of students who they feel are at risk in the community.
Right.
Okay.
And connect them to services on campus,
Okay.
like the Tang Center, which has like mental health facilities.
Okay, so it's more than getting a certificate of concern.
Yeah. No, so, I mean, the end goal is to connect them with services, but the question is, when students leave, how actively are they even kept track of, which is zero.
Yeah.
Who's accountable for following up just when a name lands on a desk? Whose job is it?
So my understanding from what the department is supposed to get in touch with this committee and say, this is a student who's not been showing up, not coming right. But that transition from say the GSI, the professor, the department to the committee, that chain breaks down oftentimes. And sometimes it'll be different. It gets lost along the way, or professors. Well, one issue I've seen at least is on account of professors not necessarily taking a lot of notice about their students' conditions of being in class, being not in class. Part of that's because they have 300 of them.
Sure.
But there's not a whole lot of interaction or engagement with that end either.
Yeah, I don't even think it's out of any maliciousness or incompetency.
Exactly.
It's just people have too much of a load to carry. The students of concern list, who's the person responsible for that? And if they're responsible for that list, but they have no authority, no resources, what are they supposed to do?
Well, it shows how we prioritize mental health. I mean, after a shooting, a mass shooting, everybody prioritizes mental health in the news for a short while, but ultimately
we prioritize shark attacks too. After
we do. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I was telling Trey, Chicago, some of the police are wonderful about mental health issues, and some of them really are not wonderful. I snuck into some of the trainings for Chicago police. They're doing CIT, crisis intervention training. And working with mental health crises goes against every bit of cop training. Because cops are supposed to walk into a situation, say, all right, you sit down, you come here, and everyone's supposed to respond because they're cops. They're big, they got guns, they got tasers, they got batons, they got the big belt, the bulletproof. People recognize that, and all right, here's the authority in the room. If someone's having a mental health crisis, none of that matters. And so they're trying to teach the police this, and it was really wonderful. There's another agency had. All right, I'll get you. This other agency had like an acting troupe of mental health consumers who were really doing a wonderful job, like leading the cops through role plays. And this is the Chicago police. I don't know if you've heard anything about them ever. Okay, the '68 Democratic Convention. When there was the '96 Democratic Convention, there were cops selling shirts out of the trunks of their cars. In '68, we kicked your parents' ass. Now it's your turn. So but some of the cops are great. So this one officer's going through the role play with, the mental health consumer who's pretending he's on a bridge and he's going to jump. And the officer's got the Chicago accent. Sir, I need you to come down. I'd like to talk to you right here. Come on down and talk to me here. No, I don't want to talk to you. Sir, I said, I need you to come down. I want you down here. I want to talk to you right here. No, I don't want to. And back and forth until the actor finally is like, giving the officer a clue. It's like, no, I don't want to talk to you. I don't like your tone of voice. Oh, you don't like my tone of voice? How's this? Get the fuck down here now! And the lieutenant in charge stops. Stop the whole thing. And so they're learning. They're getting better.
Well, in San Francisco last year, there was it was in the news for a couple of weeks that police officers were going to have to meet with the youth commission and be trained on how they approach and deal with juveniles. You know? And you didn't really hear much after that. And the coverage was essentially, hey, the cops have agreed to do a better job. Isn't that great? You know? But there's no coverage on that at all. I mean, that's another sweet place, I think, for a story. If you were to go and dig into what training have the police had? You know, how many complaints have come from foster care agencies or parents or teachers? I know a number of cops that have worked in high schools, as they call SROs. And some of them are great. I can't say that everybody does the same job, but I think there's a shocking lack of mental health training for police officers. And again, I mean, we're talking about marginalizing and not prioritizing mental health as an issue.
Which, all right, I can't even blame the cops for that, because they're right, mental health issues are not their job. No one's going to get a promotion in talking down a suicidal psychotic person. That's just not how the police department runs. I understand that, but I still need them to help me when someone's threatening to jump out a window. I'm sorry, guys. I told you I dealt with the San Francisco police once.
You did?
I got a call from the San Francisco police. They introduced themselves, said they had this wonderful program here called Homeward Bound. And when they have someone, who wants to come back home, all they need is someone to vouch for them, and they'll give them a one-way ticket out of San Francisco. And they wanted to send someone who I knew who it was back to Chicago. I said, so would you vouch for her? I said, no, keep her in San Francisco. And he blew up, and he just, what? She's sleeping on the steps of the police station here? I said, she does it here too. It's January in Chicago. Keep her there. Because she was homeless constantly. At least she made a sane decision to go to a warmer climate. And she was organized enough to do it. Good for her.
Is this the woman whose head blew up like a balloon?
Y'all know what ant abuse is? You ever seen anyone drink through it? Yeah. It's literally a pill you take, and you are physically punished if you drink alcohol. And your body convulsions. But people I've seen a couple people, and I hate ant abuse. We don't prescribe it, other people do. But someone who has ant abuse in their system, that is how severe the addiction is. They'll just keep drinking until pain goes away and they start to get a buzz. But literally, they lose control of their limbs and it's lousy.
I'm interested in what you were saying about it's not the cop's job to do mental health, right?
Yeah, they're not. It's not their job just because they're not trained for it.
Just to kind of comment on that, because it's an interesting point, because but should it be their job? Because what is the role of a policeman? Is it to protect society, protect people from themselves and from other people? And I currently work with adults who have SMI, and that's often the discussion is well, this one policeman wouldn't help us, and this one policeman didn't realize this person needed to be doing this. And then what is the threshold for what this person needs to take them to the hospital? And I think it should be part of their job, because if this person is going to harm themselves or others or is gravely disabled, then why leave them there? And then, unless they're actually holding a gun to their head or slitting their wrist, what more do you need? And I think that should be part of the training, because you are protecting society. Because if you leave that person do what they want to do anyway, then a much larger problem, I think, will come from it.
I totally agree with you. And that it should be part of their job. They're just not trained.
Yeah.
They don't perceive it as part of their job. So therefore, they're going to say it's not part of their job. And it's one of the many, many cultural things that have to change. And you had your hand up when you politely
in terms of cultural things that have to change. I think one thing, I don't know how often you visit a college campus, but it's an interesting thing that even at my private university, there's always someone on campus that is a source of entertainment. And it always is someone that's exhibiting really extreme symptoms of something, that you're just wow, I mean, from my perspective, I don't entertain it. but it is normalized, and
Okay.
therefore cops are cops, they're people, you know, so.
Yeah.
I think it's even crazier, like when you were talking about access to mental health services on college campuses. It's really intense how normalized it is, you know, even within that context, you know, for students, but there's always someone on campus, you know, that obviously needs services, but,
Yeah.
you know, it's within the culture, our generation, to kind of not, to like kind of just look away.
Yeah, I don't think it's your generation, it's just historically, there's always been the campus weirdo, the village oddball. I mean, but it gets dangerous sometimes. And the person's actually in pain. I mean, sometimes they're doing wonderful, they feel wonderful. I mean, mania is, from what everyone says, is a lot of fun. You feel really smart, you have a bunch of energy, you don't need to sleep. But, you know, there's part of it where it gets really bad. So it's someone who, even if they look like they're enjoying themselves, it goes back to the whole idea of, you know, privacy and rights. Is this a decision that person would make if they were not having psychotic symptoms? And how do we get a child or an adult who's psychotic, how do we get them to agree to take part in a newspaper story? I'd have a hard time arguing that this person who thinks the CIA is after them and God is speaking to them made an informed decision to be interviewed for a newspaper. But you're right, and we don't know how to approach the person who is presenting symptoms. That's really scary, to walk up to someone and, what do you say? I think you need some help. That's hard, and it's not fun, and the success rate's very low to walk up to a stranger and say that.
I think, you know, the point about making an informed decision, you know, people who are in crisis or people who are experiencing psychosis, I think that's one way to look at it is if somebody's actually in crisis when they're talking to you and you're writing down what they say, you can't really put a lot of stock into what they're saying. So essentially what you're ending up with is a freak show, right, for everybody to see. You know, there are people, I've talked to a lot of them over the years, who have been through the system and have, you know, to some extent come out on the other side, you know, and there are people to sort of vouch for where they were in their healing. And sometimes you can get something worthwhile there, but in terms of talking to people who are absolutely in crisis, there's not a lot of that out there. You know, again, that's something I would go, you know, there is data available, there are advocates and experts available. If you're lucky, there are social workers available and people who work in different fields that are willing to risk something to tell you what's going on in their shop. And of course, there are people who come out on the other side. I just think it's a really important thing to be extremely careful when you're talking about interviewing abuse victims or people with real mental health disorders.
No, I think that's an excellent question. You posed, why do you want to interview this person?
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, what do they really bring to the program besides entertainment, which is what you're talking about. You know, why is somebody entertaining? Because they're going through some shit that looks out of control.
Or is it titillating? I had the opportunity to ask a child who was in grad school now. Well, what was it like when you were younger, being the poster child for Walden House and Sage, the organization Sage? She said, not too cool.
You say poster child, what was?
The implication being she was interviewed in the
Got it.
Chronicle, leaving the sex industry. She was kind of high profile in San Francisco. Now she's becoming a therapist, but it still, it doesn't sound well with her thing.
No. I mean, obviously, it basically says I was trafficked, I was owned, I was demeaned, and possibly even tortured.
Yeah.
That's, you know, that's something that.
And then the journalists re-exploited me.
Sure. And that's a fear. I mean, you know, this is the focus of a lot of the reporting that I do, but you know, are issues around abuse and things like that. But
And
anybody
we
it's
want to
interesting.
know in San Francisco about SAGE. We want to know
Oh, sure.
there are agencies that are getting women out of the sex industry off the streets. We're curious, of course.
Sure. And I don't think that it's that it's necessary for somebody to come up and do some sort of Oprah, this is my life monologue
But
in
perhaps
print to make that
then it would
happen.
be the interdisciplinary team that is addressing the chronicity, the severity, and the environment that the population is dealing with.
Well, I think the standard, we're starting to assume, or, the standard I've assumed for quite a while is like, it's more a social work and legal framework is the best interest standard. So best interest of the child, best interest of the subject of the story should be the prevailing theme that you're going for, as opposed to the best interest of your publication or the best interest of yourself as a storyteller. And in the end, that will be the best interest of your publication and the best interest of yourself as a storyteller, because you'll tell better, truer stories. So, that's what we try to adhere to, for sure. We're a little bit over, so if you guys could, have a final thought for us. I think it's great to see the back end of what we're dealing on the front end, which is, what leads kids to become adults that are then in these situations wherein if they are to reproduce, what does that mean for that baby with that psychotic parent? Or what does that mean for society generally? So thank you very much for coming out and sharing that. You guys have any thoughts?
I'm a therapist. I spend a lot of time making therapy face. So I could talk for another hour and a half, so I'll just stop. And we are selling books, and we've got a Berkeley discount, we got this working class revenge novel with a little introduction about mental health.
Yeah, I didn't want to mislead anybody with the introduction. I thought that the thoughts in the introduction were important to share, but it's actually a pretty hilarious thing to read, particularly if anybody's ever found themselves thinking, my life is just going nowhere, so I'll revel in it. I think that's something most people can relate to. But the book's up here if anybody wants to.
And thank you. This is very cool. This is much cooler than when I was in social work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.